Why is the agriculture sector against RCEP? The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, is an example of a regional free trade agreement or FTA. To understand it, we need to go back a little bit in history. In 1967, the Philippines, together with Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, formed the Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN, to promote peace and stability in the region. In 1992, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement or AFTA, was adopted this time with Brunei, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar and Laos as additional ASEAN members. AFTA was intended to promote trade among ASEAN countries. 2 years later, in 1994, a larger global trade agreement, involving more than 100 countries was reached. This was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade Uruguay Round, or GATT-UR for short, which led to the formation of the World Trade Organization, or WTO. All AFTA members joined the WTO. Both AFTA and GATT-UR were trade agreements that set the level of tariffs to be levied by each country on products originating from partner countries. They also established rules on various trade-related issues, such as subsidies, trade remedies, investments, movement of natural persons, and dispute settlement. Many countries were not satisfied with the GATT-UR agreement, but could not agree on how to improve on it during the subsequent Doha development round of negotiations. Frustration over the slow pace of negotiations in the WTO led countries to negotiate smaller free trade agreements, or FTA. The AFTA was upgraded so that it could offer better trade arrangements among member countries. In 2009, the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement or ATIGA was approved. Free trade agreements like ATIGA are called preferential FTA because they usually have tariffs that are lower than in the WTO. Because of this, they are also called WTO plus agreements. For example, most of the tariffs on products traded within ASEAN were set to zero or near zero under ATIGA. Meanwhile, ASEAN started entering into free trade agreements with other countries, China in 2005, South Korea in 2007, Japan in 2008, Australia and New Zealand in 2009, and then India in 2010. These FTA have collectively been called ASEAN Plus One FTA. Then came RCEP. Negotiations regarding RCEP started in 2012, and ended in 2020. RCEP basically consolidates all the ASEAN Plus One FTA into a single trade agreement, except for the ASEAN-India FTA following India's decision to withdraw from the RCEP negotiations. RCEP came into force on January 1, 2022 with Australia, New Zealand, Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, China, Japan, Laos, Singapore, Thailand and Vietnam as original parties. South Korea joined in February 2022 and Malaysia followed suit in March 2022. As of May 2022, the Philippines, Indonesia and Myanmar have not yet signed on to RCEP. The RCEP agreement was ratified by President Rodrigo Duterte last September 2021. However, it still needs the concurrence of the Philippine Senate. Following stiff opposition from farmers and fisherfolk groups and non-government organizations, the Senate has so far deferred its decision on RCEP. Why are we in the agriculture sector against RCEP? First, we are unprepared. We continue to be vulnerable to imports. And we are still not competitive in many export markets. Second, trade has not worked for us, especially the small farmers and fishers, despite all the promised benefits in the past. RCEP will not be any better. It might even make things worse. Third, we are concerned that the trade remedies under RCEP may be ineffective, in case we encounter import surges and other trade disturbances in the future. Fourth, and perhaps most important, we don't trust the government when it says that RCEP will be good for us. Why are we not prepared? On the production side, our farmers continue to suffer from low productivity, high production costs, poor quality of products, and inability to sustain supply. Handling and transporting products from the farm to the consumers remain very expensive. This makes our goods cost more than imports, more so, if these imports are subsidized or are smuggled, misdeclared or undervalued. Local traders are then forced to buy at lower prices from farmers, in order to compete with the cheaper imports, and maintain their profit margin. But retail prices for consumers do not necessarily fall, as we have seen with rice, pork and fish imports. In many cases, traders just pocket most of the difference. These same problems on the production and marketing side make it difficult for us to sell our products abroad and compete in export markets. Yes, we export a lot of bananas, pineapple, coconut-based and fishery products, but nothing much else beyond this. And it has been that way for many years. In the meantime, our competitors have been innovating and improving, displacing many of our own exportable products, including coconut juice and patis, while supplying us with products that we can, and should, be able to produce, like mungo, peanuts and black pepper. The result is huge, and increasing, agricultural trade deficits. We import much more than we export. And the gap is getting larger every year. All countries that can join RCEP, except Japan, sell more agricultural products to us than we export to them. The value of our exports is the lowest among the large economies in ASEAN. And we have the worst trade imbalance in the entire region. Will RCEP be able to reverse these trends? Most likely not, unless we first fix the problems that hound our production and marketing systems. So, knowing that we are not ready to compete, why are we in such a hurry to join RCEP? Some economists claim that our country will benefit a lot by joining RCEP. However, most of their projections are based on unrealistic assumptions, and on economic models that rarely play out in the Philippine setting. This has been proven time and again in the past. Instead of generating billions of dollars from exports and other benefits, as was promised when we joined the WTO, we ended up with over $7 billion in trade deficits. We lost over 1 million jobs in agriculture. And our agriculture sector's contribution to our gross domestic product shrank from 20 to 10%. Free trade simply has not worked for our agricultural sector, particularly most of our small farmers and fisherfolk. How then can we believe all these optimistic projections about RCEP, if the people who make them have been so wrong in the past? Also, we are being told that RCEP offers significant export opportunities for our products, because customs duties will be reduced, and we will enjoy other preferential arrangements with our trading partners. But we must keep in mind that almost all these market access opportunities are already available to us under ATIGA and the ASEAN FTA with China, Japan, Korea, Australia and New Zealand. RCEP will just consolidate, but will not replace these trade agreements. These will remain in effect, and we can still take advantage of them, even if we don't join RCEP. So, it is difficult to believe warnings that we will lose our export markets to other RCEP member countries, just because we are outside RCEP. We must also understand that any new trade opportunity that might come from RCEP will not be exclusive to the Philippines. This trade opportunity will be available for all other RCEP member countries. For instance, if China sets its tariff on canned pineapples to zero, all RCEP members, and not just the Philippines, can avail of this concession. And, if we remain uncompetitive, it will be they, and not us, who will be able to sell their canned pineapples to China at zero tariff. The threat of trade diversion will therefore come from our inability to catch up with our competitors. This will be a challenge, whether we are inside RCEP or not. In the same manner, all incentives for foreign investments provided by RCEP to the Philippines will be available to all other members. There is, therefore, no assurance that investors will come to us just because we join RCEP. They could very well enjoy the same benefits in other RCEP countries, where the costs of doing business and the investment climate might be more attractive. Let us take a look now at what we have committed under RCEP. Under RCEP, the customs duties on 75% of our agricultural tariff lines will immediately be set to zero. Tariffs on another 8% will be phased out over several years. Another 7% will be subjected to partial tariff reduction. According to RCEP proponents, farmers should not worry, because tariffs for ultra-sensitive products, like rice, corn, meats, coffee and sugar, which comprise about 9% of total agricultural tariff lines, will not have any tariff cuts. But what if something goes wrong, and import surges occur? In these instances, the GATT-Uruguay Round Agreement allows countries to impose so-called safeguard duties, on top of regular tariffs, to arrest the import surge. RCEP has similar provisions, for what is called transitional safeguards, and it is these transitional safeguards that concern us a lot. Under RCEP, a cap, or limit, will be placed on safeguard duties, that can be imposed, if a surge happens, and causes harm to a domestic sector. For example, let us say that our most favored nation, or MFN applied tariff, or the tariff we impose on WTO members in general, is 15%, for a certain commodity. Let us add, that, under RCEP, we commit to maintain that 15% tariff for the first 14 years, and then drop it to zero thereafter. What happens, if an import surge occurs, during the first 14 years? Under RCEP rules, a transitional safeguard duty, plus the RCEP regular tariff prevailing at that time, cannot exceed the starting MFN tariff of 15%. Since, in our example, the RCEP regular tariff is already at 15%, we can no longer add any safeguard duty, because we would then exceed the starting MFN tariff of 15%. When the RCEP tariff drops to zero, in the 15th year, then there is space to impose a safeguard duty. But the safeguard duty that we can impose cannot go beyond 15%. It is this cap on allowable safeguard duties that worries us a lot. What happens if the transitional safeguard duties are not enough to effectively address an import surge because of these caps? To make matters worse, the cap is based on applied MFN tariff levels, and not on so-called bound rates that can be higher. RCEP rules also state that, should we, later on, lower our applied MFN tariff, this new tariff will become the new limit on safeguard duties. It should also be stressed that these rules will apply to both agricultural and industrial products. RCEP defenders point to two paragraphs, at the latter portion of the RCEP legal text, which state that member countries can still avail of safeguard provisions, under the GATT-Uruguay Agreement of the WTO. Under this agreement, there are no caps on safeguard duties. However, we continue to harbor doubts about this assurance. No country, in its right mind, will choose the restrictive RCEP safeguards, if it knows it can avail of more flexible trade remedies, using WTO rules. So why did the RCEP negotiators devote 7.5 out of 9 pages talking about RCEP transitional safeguards, only to supersede it at the end? There is something more than meets the eye here. And up to now, we have not received a convincing explanation from the government. This brings us to the issue of trust. All these doubts and apprehensions about free trade are not new. But at least, in the past, the government, especially the Department of Agriculture, regularly consulted and involved us in crafting the country's positions and strategies in trade negotiations. So, even if we were not fully satisfied with the end result, we remain confident that our concerns would be addressed and supported if trade problems occurred. The situation today is totally different. The Department of Agriculture has forgotten its priority mandate to work for the welfare of the country's farmers and fisherfolk. It has shifted its focus to keeping consumer prices low, checking inflation, and ensuring food availability through import. The department has also stopped consulting seriously with farmers. It has been disseminating deceptive propaganda while ignoring farmers' complaints at the same time. Instead of focusing on helping farmers recover from calamities and the COVID pandemic, the department has taken the easy way out by allowing huge volumes of imports, unilaterally reducing tariffs, and even refusing to impose safeguard duties. So when this government asks us to support RCEP, boasts about the many benefits from the agreement, and warns against the dangers of not joining, alarm bells immediately ring in our minds and tell us that something fishy may be going on. It is better to miss the RCEP bus than to be run over under it because of our haste and carelessness. We will not lose much anyway, because our trade, under the existing free trade agreements, will continue, even if we don't join RCEP now. Later on, when we will have understood RCEP more fully, and are more prepared for the journey, there may be no obstacle to finally hopping into the RCEP bus.